What is going on, y'all? KMBest here. New backdrop, new location. We'll see how it all pans out. Let's take a look at the best decks to climb in Marvel Snap. While the release of Surge has greatly impacted the metagame and the way decks are built in it in some ways, it has also not changed what I consider to be the best deck in the game, which is Thanos Ongoing. For 2 weeks running, I've made videos alluding to and then explicitly stating the fact that I believe Thanos Ongoing to be significantly better than the Thanos Strange Supreme list in terms of both cube equity and win rate equity, which makes it, in my opinion, a stronger deck. My personal belief is that while it does have a few things that make it a little bit weaker to specific cards like Killmonger, the general power level and smoothness of the deck more than makes up for that, and the only thing that you'll really need to get used to is managing your board space without Strange Supreme to bail you out, and managing your point dedication without tech cards to bail you out. In exchange, you get one of the most flexible and useful point packages that Marvel Snap has ever seen. And to be clear, I still think the Strange Supreme Thanos is a very strong deck. It might very well be the second best deck in this metagame, but I do think that Ongoing Thanos edges it out just at the top. Here's where we're going to start seeing a lot of Surge. One of the cool things about Surge is she just seems to be like a gimmicky card, but she really ends up working with a bunch of different types of things. A very strong 2-drop that has just been in a bunch of stuff because it's very hard for her to be bad. One of the things that I'm interested to figure out is how much of this is her with staying power and how much of this is just, oh, she's good, she's never going to be bad, I'm going to put her in my deck with other good stuff, and I'm not really going to notice a difference from any other card that I'm running. That said, I currently do have her in my Thanos list. If I wasn't playing Strange Supreme, I would prefer an Iron Patriot to her. This is a deck where it's just, you're basically playing her for the free roll. You're not doing anything special with her. She goes in the deck, she gets you some discounts, she gets you some extra power, but that's really kind of it. And so that's a cool thing for a card to do, but far from required if you want to be playing this version of the list. This is a much heavier tech-oriented version of the deck. Note the inclusion of Rogue. Again, we're just loading up on tech between Rogue and Mobius and Cosmo and Red Guardian and Shang-Chi. We're all tech and then some points packages. The things that are really holding Thanos up, in my opinion, are Thanos himself, of course, and then Mockingbird and Sam Wilson. Those are the commonalities across every single Thanos deck that you will absolutely always see. There are a couple other common things that happen, like Mobius being in both of the lists that I'm showing you today, and Cosmo being in both of the lists that I'm showing you today. But I think those 3 cards are the things that are primarily responsible for the power level of both of these lists. Another place Surge has really made a difference is in various Silver Surfer builds. I believe this one is a version that I got from Honifer. I'm going to show another one in addition later. This is sort of what the Surge build tends to look like. It's a very solid, very reasonable deck that just does a decent amount of points, that has a large amount of flexibility and customization that you could put into it. Surge is effectively a way for you to get some cheaper stuff onto the board. She's almost playing the Hope Summers role some of the time, allowing you to go 3+3 on turn 5. That's very strong. But the other thing she does is sort of be a pseudo Zabu. So when you have a card that can combine the ability that Zabu gives you to play your 4-drops a turn early, and the ability that Hope Summers gives you to go 3+3 on turn 5, you can see why Surge is in so many of these decks. She does come with a few relatively awkward situations that she can put you in. For example, if you don't draw the right stuff off of your Surge, she gets a lot worse. This is a high variance card. You can put yourself in bad Surge situations. Let's say both of your 6-drops, or both of your 4-drops remain in the deck, and you need to top deck something that you can play that's a 3. You draw the 4 instead. You feel bad about it. It's kind of a thing that does come up. One of the other things that I noticed is that the deck doesn't necessarily lack good curve 3s, but it has fewer of them enough that you will notice it sometimes. Surge is doing a decent amount to boost this deck, but it's frankly just a very solid points package with a variety of different interactive tools that can be placed into it. Of all of the Sam Wilson plus Juggernaut decks that survived the Agamotto season when everything was a Sam Wilson plus Juggernaut deck, This is certainly not the one that I would have expected to have lasted this long, but it definitely has. Surgeless Surfer looks a bit like this, and the reason it looks a bit like this is because it is quite important in the mirror to be able to be the Surfer deck that just has these various onboard advantages. Part of why Makari makes sense is the same reason why something like Negasonic makes sense. If you have more threes on the board than your opponent who is playing Surfer, you are going to win. And that is generally what this deck does. This is a build that Heart of the Cards played up to rank 3, a very solid Surgeless build that also has some additional utility, not just into the mirror, but into a variety of other lists you might see in the metagame. Now, I'm usually pretty good about deck credit, and for this reason, I'm going to say something right now that might be controversial. I realize all I did was put Surge into a normal version of the Ajax deck, but I saw people taking out the Lizard and putting in US Agent, and they were getting credit for this, and it pissed me off. So as much as I am good about deck credit, I'm going to deck credit myself for this one. This is, of course, what Ajax looks like. In my opinion, it is likely to be the best version of traditional Ajax. I realize there's some weird dynamics, like do we want to be playing traditional Ajax? Do we want to be playing the Abomination version? What about the Batroc package in the Abomination version? I think this is the safest play, the one that will have the most consistently high ceiling. If you want to play one of these lists, this is the one that is in a vacuum going to be the flat, generically best option because of a generally fairly even matchup spread. However, it does have a notable weakness to things that are able to just go very far over the top of it. I don't necessarily think that that is a guarantee, but I do think that it is notable that the way Surge forces this deck to play makes it much more of a mid-range crusher. It is built to deal with that kind of stuff, rather than something that can deal with, like, your average random Galactus deck or like Black Panther deck or just like whatever weird combo thing is going over the top of you. You basically have no tools for it. Explosive Ajax looking very similar, give or take a Grandmaster over a Scorpion. Grandmaster doing double duty here because it also discounts your Miles Morales. Very relevant, it does move a card. The strategy with this deck is, and has always been, frankly, to do something stupid with Hazmat that enables you to play Miles Morales, Ajax, and Abomination on the final turn of the game, just slam them down, mass amounts of power, and then the rest of your cards are just like pretty good mid-range cards with this explosive finish on the back end. This is still a very viable thing to do, although now that other people are playing Luke Cage decks, Surge specifically pushing the previous deck that we talked about back into relevance, it is a little bit worse to be counting on an Abomination being discounted or to be counting on an Ajax having a certain amount of power. Further hybridization has been happening here. I have particularly enjoyed playing various Batroc shells, and this uses the Ajax Abomination High Evo top end alongside a more move-oriented package to make the sub-package the Afflict stuff and the main bit of the deck the move stuff, which is a sort of inversion of the previous list. What I like about this deck is when it draws correctly, it can have massively powerful early game scalers that are much bigger and better than stuff like Scorpion and Cassandra Nova. A Batroc into a Sam Wilson is almost snap condition. It's a very powerful thing to do. This is a deck that I think is genuinely a little bit underrated, and the Batroc package I also think is a little underrated. Speaking of the Batroc package, this is one of the several Batroc package decks that you will see on this tier list. That is, of course, the Scream iteration of the Batroc package. This is a very straightforward application of doing what the Batroc package is telling you to do. There are some notable iffy things going on here. I've been thinking really hard about how I want to get Arrow into here. I think I might want to cut Kingpin, but then if I'm cutting Kingpin, I don't really have another consistent one-drop, and I really do want a consistent one-drop so I can go Cannonball +1 when I don't have Miles. It's a deck that is in flux. It's a deck that is a little bit confusing, but I do think that it is also a deck that has been overlooked greatly with the amount of Surge decks that are being played. I'm actually not totally convinced you can't play Surge in here, although I do think it is a likely bad inclusion for what it's worth, because this deck typically tends to play all of its cards anyway. Surge is cool, but is more for decks that need that facilitation, getting a 4 down early, or getting multiple cards out of your hand that you otherwise wouldn't be able to do, a la Surfer. This is a deck that I don't think benefits from her nearly as much. One of the cool things about the centralization of ongoing Thanos is that there's a lot of full boards out there, which makes Dagger and Sage very interesting and very strong. Since those boards are just sort of consistently full, you're going to get good value out of both of them. You do have to be fairly conscious of like getting Cosmo sniped late. These are decks that also have Red Guardians some of the time, the other Thanos lists, but if more people are playing ongoing, this is the kind of thing that you can wheel out in order to beat the ongoing list, where it has more trouble against the other lists. When we talk about the dynamics of what makes Thanos ongoing stronger, a lot of it is that the other Thanos deck is protecting it from a lot of bad matchups just by existing and making people scared of playing stuff like this, or like dedicating slots to Killmonger because it's not nearly as good against the Strange Supreme Thanos. They're sort of playing off of each other. And this is a deck that is very much better against ongoing Thanos than it is against the Strange Supreme Thanos. And I think that's a really important note to make, because this is a deck that has some notable weaknesses to like various Cosmo Alliance stuff some of the time, to Red Guardian. Multiple of those cards are not in the ongoing Thanos, but they are in the Strange Supreme Thanos. So if this deck starts really picking up, which I don't consider incredibly likely given how difficult that it is, my evaluation of ongoing and Strange Supreme Thanos could totally invert itself based on a high play rate of a bad matchup. There's a pretty decent amount of Mobius in the metagame, which makes Mr. Negative, as is typical of Mobius metagames, a fairly awkward choice. A lot of the decks that are popular are going to be whipping out Mobiuses on you pretty much left and right, and because you are not always going to know whether or not they have it, you're only really going to get a hint if they decide to snap you. For the record, if you're a Mobius deck and Mr. Negative snaps you and you draw your Mobius late and you snap them, sometimes you're going to have to think about what if they got good cards enough that they can win by my snap telling them that I have a Mobius. That kind of stuff is something you're going to want to pay attention to. And of course, Mr. Negative, when you are snapped and you can assume a Mobius a lot of the time because you beat basically everything else, you need to start thinking, okay, I need to beat this Mobius. It's coming down right now. Is there anything I can do? Can I beat Mobius plus X or Y or whatever it is that you think they might be doing? Very much worth considering. This is a deck that is held back by basically one card. It would otherwise be pretty phenomenally powerful, I gotta say. I think this deck, if Mobius doesn't exist, is likely one of, if not the best decks in the entire game. There are a couple flex slots in Clog. I would basically aim it at Enchantress and DerekHawk. I've been seeing more people playing Hobgoblin recently, which I think is nice, especially against ongoing Thanos, because if you're able to make that read, ongoing Thanos is usually going to have multiple lanes with like 3 things in it before or on turn 5, and that makes a Hobgoblin absolutely lane winning. So I've really enjoyed seeing that come out of these decks. It's very cool. There is some downside, like ongoing Thanos becoming more popular. Yes, the stones are all on reveals, but there are going to be draws in ongoing Thanos decks where your gore is just not going to be that big, and they're going to be able to put power into locations that are otherwise closed off. It's not as free of a matchup as you might think if you start removing things like DerekHawk and you start removing things like Enchantress, as I've seen so many people do. That's why I'm still on this build, but I do think there's a lot more flex in this deck as it tries to adapt to different things people are trying than there was previously. Good news for Thena gamers, I think Surge probably does go in this deck. Bad news, it's not adding anything cool. This is just a deck that really wanted like another good 2-drop. We've talked about playing Sam Wilson and US Agent in that spot. A lot of people have been like, oh, I'll play Surge and Esme, and then I'll play Iron Man. And as far as I can tell, based on both my experience and looking at some numbers, it's not good, or at least it's not better than not doing that. Like, that is one of those things where you are changing a deck to facilitate something that is dropping your win rate rather than facilitating something that is raising your win rate. It's cool, but ultimately, I hate to say it, but I fear the best build of the Thena deck with Surge is just putting Surge in the normal Thena deck and then being like, oh, cool, look at my little bit of extra power that I get off of this 2-drop. Let's go have some extra power out of it. I'm not even necessarily 100% convinced it's better than just playing US Agent, but it does let you do some very cool and interesting stuff as long as you're willing to sort of aim away from Thena in some situations. It subsidizes your ability to play two threes on the final turn of the game after you have played an Alex Summers out there. Havoc is eating your energy, so much like Surfer wants to play 2 3s on 5, your 6 is effectively 5. If you played a Havoc on 5, you get that ability out of Surge. That's her main utility to me in this deck, is that she enables you to not have to pay for Havoc effectively, and he pays you off for that. Like, you are going to be able to be more aggressive with Havoc if you have a Surge down. That does matter, and they do work well together. This card is at a bit of an ebb, in large part, I think, because not just Tech Thanos having like 57 things that stop your final turn from happening, but ongoing Thanos also being a Cosmo deck, and the generalized existence of Red Guardian being pretty awkward. The fact that ongoing Thanos is pushing people to play ongoing Tech makes your Mobius look super bad. There's just, not your Mobius, makes your Morbius look super bad. I apologize. It's not Mobin time, it's Morbin time. But this is still a deck that has its baseline power intact. It's just getting pushed a little bit more than it would normally get pushed, in the sense that, like, you know, if you nut off, you're beating an ongoing Thanos draw. But if you don't, like, do the full, like, 2 Dakins and a Morbius and a MODOK and a Bullseye and my Swarm is in hand, if you don't do all of that, you're not necessarily going to outpower ongoing Thanos. Like, it is really remarkable the degree to which that deck can just do numbers that are just very large across multiple lanes. And you can do it with your nut draws, but a lot of your normal draws, like basically every draw where you're like using stuff like Blade and Colleen on a Scorn, and you're not using those to like get your nut draw swarms off, you're probably not hitting ongoing Thanos levels of power unless you're also doing everything else I just said. Surtur is just a pretty solid deck. I feel like it's been underrated for a while, in large part because, you know, good players don't love to play it. It's just kind of a boring deck that does kind of boring stuff, but sometimes boring is a good thing. There's a really famous workout plan called Boring But Big. I think one of the most recommended new workout plans is just straight up 5x5. It's not fancy, but it doesn't have to be. You just have to show up and put the work in. And that's kind of what Surtur is all about. This is just Surtur Sauron classic. I'm playing big stuff. I'm discounting another big thing. I'm just going to play a lot of power, deal with my power. When I have Surtur, when I have Sauron, my draws are just very strong consistently. It's Denish Hela. For more on this deck, you can check out my most recent video with Denish. This is a relatively solid mid-range beater if you're running into a lot of Ajax, if you're running into a lot of Surfer. This is the kind of deck that can just be like, I don't care what you're doing. It actually doesn't matter at all. What I'm going to do is just be bigger than you. I'm going to do something stupid, and you're going to have to sit there and watch with your fair little army of 3/2s that you make stronger. Congratulations on making your 2 power guys into much stronger than 2 power guys. I have a gore. Couple of honorable mentions here. We're going to start with DerekHawk, which is from, of course, Derek. A very reasonable attempt at saying, wow, there's a lot of Thanos. Let's play Darkhawk. Notably, this is coming out on what I believe to be Krakoa hot location. I'm not saying this is a good choice specifically for today, but I think it's probably a great choice for today, if that makes any sense. Just being able to have this massively large Darkhawk slam that down on a Krakoa and get a massive boost to whatever your next card is, that is extremely helpful. Darkhawk has always been an archetype that I particularly appreciated, in large part because it lets me cope stay, because you might just be like looking at an opponent who has 2 rocks in hand and they just have to sit there and pretend they don't. That kind of stuff, I really enjoy those dynamics. Partially a bit of a homer pick from me, but once again, I think this is an example of where Surge can shine in terms of freeing up energy and making your late game cards be playable a little bit early. We've talked about Surge's role in the deck full of 4s in making them be playable on 3. You see her a lot with Galacta and Gwenpool doing pretty much the same thing. This is her taking a 5 that is otherwise a very large dedication of energy and intent. You can now play that on 4 where it is much more comfortable. Not that you necessarily are playing it on 4, but you can play it for 4. Similar principle here. This is, I think, the first time I've ever had 2 decks from the same person on here. Again, a homer pick, but I do think this is a very solid application of the Batroc package and the Surge package. And that's part of why I wanted to put it on here, because it illustrates those things so incredibly well. We have the Batroc package as our low to the ground stuff. That is there to get our scalers going. We have a bunch of scalers. They all play for more than their energy's worth. Then we have the Surge package, which is Surge with some beefy 4s that are also sort of scaling. You play them earlier, you get more from a Galacta, for example. That's what this deck is built on. It's built on using Surge to compound other advantages, and I think it's a very cool representation of two packages that I expect to see a lot going forward. Last up is a Regis Kilbin deck that is on here mostly for play rate reasons. You should be prepared to see this. My personal impression is that it's a very interesting and weird and solid application of just being like a Surge control list, but I do think it's been passed by a few other Surge control lists, such as this one, which is, I believe, from Shuri Enjoyer, who is back playing Marvel Snap, a very solid, similar concept. Use Surge in the 4s list, so you have your 4s that are getting discounted by Surge, you have your 4s that are getting discounted by Zabu. It's actually a very similar in concept to my second Zabu list of the Ajax list. It was the first video I did on Surge the day she came out, basically. That's the same idea here, where people look at Surge and they're like, I need to be playing her with low-cost cards. It's actually not that. You need to be playing her with 4s and 5s that she makes into 3s and 4s. Do I even really have to say anything about Destroy at this point, or would you just rather go watch the last few seconds of every other tier list I've ever done? All right, y'all, thank you so much for watching. As always, I have been KMBest. You have been phenomenal. I do want to give a little bit of an update on me and moving and why is that there and all of that stuff. I am in my new house. Today is the last day of moving. I wanted to thank everybody for very literally contributing to the house that Marvel Snap built with every watch here and on Twitch and YouTube and all of that stuff. I know this is YouTube. I'm rambling a little bit. It's hard to properly express the level of gratitude I feel to all of y'all. I know I don't necessarily do the best job of showing it all the time. Yelling at people on Twitch is kind of a thing that I do. But I do want to make sure everyone knows that I really am grateful for all of your support. Hopefully we'll get some better decoration up here so it doesn't look like I'm broadcasting from the inside of a fairly low-rent Florida strip club. But for now, I will see you in the next one.